Hey everyone, in the last video we looked at RSpec, what it is, why it's great, how you can get started with it, what TDD is, and so on. So we're going to continue that thought exercise here. And we went through this first test of saying, well, the coffee by default should not be prepared because it's still in the bean format. So now that we have that in mind, to get it ready to be consumed by people, we should probably give it a grind method. And so that's what we'll do next. And this is the syntax for that. So you say describe and then a pound sign and the name of the method. And then you can say it and what that method does to an instance of the coffee. So from this before block, we know that this will run before this test does, and so you have this @coffee variable available to you. So we're going to say @coffee.grind, and then we're going to expect the prepared attribute to be true. So now we have a couple tests for the coffee class. Let's see what happens if we try to run these tests. What will the result be? Now, if you have not set up RSpec before, you'll have to do that by running gem install RSpec. So now you have that, and the way that you call it is by saying RSpec and then coffeeshop.rb. So it's going to freak out and say, what's wrong? All right. So it's going to say uninitialized constant coffee, and that's true. There is no coffee class. We just wrote tests for it. So why don't we make a class coffee and see what that does for us. Okay, interesting. So this one says undefined method prepared. So what we need to do is make an attribute prepared and an initialized method that will set the value that we want to be associated with that attribute when an instance of coffee gets created for the first time. So when it's created, what we want it to be is unprepared, right? Or we want the prepared value to be false. So let's try this again and see what happens. Okay, so you can see we got the one dot, and a dot means the test passed. F means it failed. So this first one is satisfied. Coffee.prepared is false by default, so that's great. Now it says, okay, what is this? Undefined method grind for coffee. So we need to make a grind method. All right, so let's try this again. And we have 2 passing tests, so that's great. Now, basically what we just did in the last minute or two is say we set out kind of in English actually, like what we wanted out of our program, and we came up with like this prepared, or we came up with this grind method, and sort of by thinking about it in English, just in our heads, we were able to then have a sense of what had to be written into the class to satisfy those tests. And so this is actually one of the really nice, I would say, features of test-driven development, is that it allows you to like think about what you want out of your program in English and then go to code second. And that has the added benefit of, if you're communicating with non-technical people on your team, like a product manager or like other stakeholders, clients, and so on, you can give them, you can get their requirements and communicate it to them in a way that makes sense to both of you. And then as you're framing your own thoughts, RSpec is like a little more focused of a context that will then get you started when you're actually writing the application. You'll know that what you're creating is going to meet the requirements of your boss, client, product manager, and so on. So anyways, now that we've finished coffee, let's move on to the next part of it, which is a cup. Let's write some tests for cups. Now, a lot of testing you can do by copying and pasting old tests and then modifying them, and so I'll save us some time by doing that for us right here. So, all right, I've now filled out this skeleton for us here. So we have describe cup and then the do block for that whole model. Within that, we have like one behavior of a cup, which is the ability to be filled and emptied. So this second do block here scopes our context a little bit tighter than if we were just doing all the possible activities for a cup. The ability to be filled and empty is one big part of a cup's life, but it also gets washed, it also gets put away, it also gets bought and sold, and so on. But we're not talking about any of that. We're just looking at we're only building the ability to be filled and emptied with coffee. In our before block, what do we need for the context to, I should say, what do we need in the context for this set of tests for them to work? What objects? And assuming you're not cheating by looking over here, you'll know that we need an instance of a cup itself and an instance of coffee, because coffee is what's going to get put into the cup. So now we have the cup and coffee, and in a similar vein as when we were doing the coffee object, we want it to have a default state. So we have expect cup.filled to be false. And from there, we want it to be able to be filled with coffee. So that's what we're going to do with the second one. So now we're looking for a couple things here. First, we're looking for the attribute of filled for our instance of cup to be true. We called this, we grind the coffee first, and then we fill it with the instance of coffee that we just ground. And now we're making two assertions that we need to be true for the test to pass. The first is expect cup.filled to be true. So that's going to be an attribute of the cup. And then if we want to see like, okay, what kind of beverage is in the cup, we want that beverage to be the instance of coffee. So those are all of our tests for the cup object. And now let's run the test suite again. So it freaked out. What's it missing? So uninitialized constant cup. All right, so we can do that. And we'll go again. Undefined method filled. Undefined method fill. So filled, remember, is an attribute. So we want something like this. And then we want the initial value to be false. All right, so we added the attribute and then defined it, and that's now passing. We need to make the fill method so that a cup can accept an instance of ground coffee. So let's do that. So now we've added the fill method. It takes an instance of coffee, it changes the filled attribute to be true, and it says that the beverage that is associated with an instance of a cup is the instance of coffee that you pass into it. Now, let's try it again, and I think that it will pass. Oh, it doesn't pass. Interesting. All right, so what do we see here? Oh, you know what it is? So, okay. Undefined method beverage. So what we need to do here is beverage. And there you go. That's basically the whole, so there's way more. There's a bunch more tests. There's a bunch more models. I think that you get the intuition so far of like how the thought process goes. And so I'll leave the example here for you. And if you'd like to go through, so we got through coffee and cup, which is lines like 80 through 120. If you want to look through barista and customer and so on, and then like look at what code I wrote for those up here, that's there for you. Now I want to wrap up by also pointing out that for the most part, if you're doing this, it's because you're like doing it in the context of Rails or like Sinatra. You know, very rarely are you just going to have a one file program, but I wanted to do this on purpose so that it was more limited in scope. When you're doing it in Rails, hopefully if you're following the convention, you'll be doing separate tests for models, views, and controllers. And that's really, it's a, the MVC design pattern for Rails is very helpful, and it's nice that RSpec is also set up in a way where the convention is that you also test the models and the views and the controllers on their own. There's something called a factory, which allows you to define more complex objects. So here we had pretty simple objects, but if you are doing, say, an e-commerce application or something where you're testing a customer model and the customer has attributes all over the place from a bunch of different tables, and you don't want to explicitly define those in a before block and so on, that you can take advantage of factories through a gem called Factory Girl, and that will give you that'll give you the ability to like predefine objects to work on. So I hope you found this helpful. I will come up with as many relevant links to share in the description as I can, and I'll see you all in the next one.